this is going to be what we're going to be creating for the next one. Oh, come on. There we go. So it's basically just a low polygon scene. Don't zoom in. Don't zoom in. Good. So we're going to be basically creating this environment where we have a house and we have some stuff. You can customize your house however you want. You can customize your yard however you want. The idea with this is having enough detail that it looks good. If I didn't go into enough detail on the house, it would look very boring and like pretty much disgusting. So things like this little mesh down here, like these bars here, all of those add some nice detail to it. These lines, even this part of the house where it's like extruded outward, that adds a nice little bit of detail to it to break up those shapes. And you can't really see it too good, but there's a pool in the backyard as well.
There's no front door.
Not yet, no. On one of my iterations, I had a front door, and then on this one, I forgot to put the front door. So we'll be doing a standard version, which is just this, and then we'll be playing with some different ways that we can kind of show things off. So just so you can kind of compare side by side, this is the original camera, which has some perspective distortion to it. This is a parallel camera, which basically flattens it out, but still gives us that 3D look to it, so it's kind of a neat way to show it off. There's also a color temperature assigned to the camera, so you can see how it kind of has this orange tint to it. This one has a depth of field to it, so you can see how it's soft here, and then soft in the back, and then crisp right up there. Oops. This one has a fisheye, and then this one is using something called Sketch and Tune, which is inside of Cinema. If you stay in motion design or you progress and start to play more with this kind of style, you need to play around with different ways to render things out. This is 5 different ways that you could render something. There's dozens of ways you could render stuff depending on what you want to accomplish, even breaking it down into wireframes and gradients on here and a whole bunch of other stuff that you could really get into to help customize what you want the end result to look like. So part of this assignment is playing with some basic modeling tools, and then the other part is a lot of review. Using cloners is going to be very helpful, staying organized obviously, and then being able to render these things out so that we have these different kind of looks. Okay, so I'm not going to go step by step through this. I'm going to show you the starting points of it. The rest of it you already kind of know, so I want you to then explore and start to play with it. So the first thing that I did was I started off with a shape to create that landmass. So start off with a shape to create the landmass. You can add some divisions here, so there, and let's say there. So there's my lines. So then I can start to deform this. So if you look at what this has on it, it has these little like divisions here. So to create those, it's simply a matter of just moving stuff around. So I go into this, I grab some points and move them up, move them down. Just to get some basic shape to it, nothing crazy, just basic shape. That's all this is doing. I want to really stay away from the top of it. If I start to like round that off, it's very hard to get my house to then round into that area without looking stupid. And you'll see how subtle these movements are. I'm not going crazy with it. I'm just kind of nudging things up and down. And then you want to do this all the way around because at some point you may want to have like a 360. You may want to put this inside of a scene and do something else with it. So that gives me my base shape. Then I'm going to smooth it out. So I'm going to use my subdivision to smooth out the shape. You'll see that I lost a bit of it, but that's not a problem because I can just lower this, lower that. That's fine. I'm going to hit C on this again. And then now I have a bit more detail, but it has the same kind of grooves that I just had a second ago. So then what I can do is I want to start enhancing this, start pulling stuff down a bit more. So I'm going to go up to my sculpt menu. And on this, I'm going to use pull. And I showed this on the product one. I'll just go use grab. Make sure that my stuff is set correctly. Off on surface. Let me just grab everything just to be safe. There we go. Okay. There we go. So now my grab is going to work. So this is going to give me that definition of what that peak looks like. Oops. I don't know what it is, but every time I come into this program, my settings are back to where they shouldn't be. But only when I'm lecturing. There we go. So that's good there. Again, I'll put another subdivision on here. And now I'm starting to get that shape, and then I could go in again, hit C, go to my points, and then start to pull down even further. Okay, so this is just adding that level of detail to it as much as I want to go into to create that look. Come on. There we go. So now we have that piece. Create the other piece underneath. It's the same exact thing, except obviously the top is just locked into that area. So you can actually copy this, bring it down a bit, scale it in, points, go to the grab, make your brush huge. Not even bigger. These things lie, so you can go further than that. That's way too big. 250. There we go. So I'm just pulling this down so that obviously it sticks out a bit, pushing this in so it doesn't come out of the ground. I'm just trying to find a nice way that this, you know, would look pretty decent. Okay, push that in, push this in. Okay, I can also use smooth and smooth this out. So if I go to too crazy on it, I can do that. There we go. So that gives me just a nice little shape of it. I'll probably still play with that or whatever. Okay, so that gets you kind of part of the way. Another stage of this is adding another level of detail. So all these like little crinkles and stuff that are added to that, we can use a bunch of different methods to do it. I could go in with my sculpting tool and literally just sculpt each one of those cracks or crevices or bumps or whatever. The other thing we can do is under here, there's a bunch of different tools that that we could play with. So like one of the things we could do is we could play with like bulge or twist or melt or any of these. So let's say I used FFD and I drop that in here. This gives me this box that allows me to there we go, to tweak the shape of it. So this fits right inside here. If I switch to points, I can grab these points and move it, and you'll see how it adjusts that. So I'm basically adjusting this huge shape by tweaking these few points. Okay, so that allows me to kind of tweak the shape a little bit more here, and oops, there. Okay, now you'll notice in the area here that this is underneath that. So like our subdivision surface, we typically put our object in the subdivision surface. This one, that deformer is underneath it because it's deforming that object. There we go. So I like that. Okay. So when I'm satisfied, I can just, again, hit object mode. And that's good. Okay. So now I'm going to go to here, and I'm going to add a displacer. Drop that into the mix. Oops. Right there. Come on. There we go. I just want it on the bottom. Okay, and what the displacer will do is it'll actually move the geometry. So it'll actually add noise to the geometry so that the points kind of like wiggle outward. So the way it works is I go to the displacer, I go to my shading, and you add a noise shader to this. And you'll see the second it did that, it added that displacement to it. Okay, now this is different than a bump map. A bump map is like a fake bump that happens on here. This is actually moving the surface. If I render this, you'll see that it actually has that displaced surface. The edges actually look kind of jetted out. A bump map wouldn't have the edges looking jumpy out like that. Jumpy out. I can go to the noise. I can play with what kind of noise this is. So just like before, you can kind of tweak what you want these things to look like. It's gorgeous. All right. So I'm going to say I'm satisfied with that. If I don't like how something is laying out, I could always go back to my points, go back to my smooth brush, and start to smooth out some of these points, and that'll help smooth out that texture. So before, you can see this kind of like wrinkly, saggy thing, and then that's a bit nicer. Okay. So I don't want to do that to everything. Like my grass that's up here, I want that to stay pretty nice and smooth. But the dirt, I want that to look like dirt, so it's kind of clumpy and whatever else. All right, so that gives me my starting point of the land, at least, of where my stuff is. So let's start naming things to stay organized. So this will be dirt. This will be land. I can drop these two onto layers just so I don't screw them up. Oops. There we go. And I'll take this and make sure everything's on there, so that goes away. Cool. All right, so I'm going to lock this so I don't ruin those. And then what I want to do is, and this may seem counterintuitive, instead of building the house first, I want to actually build the fence first, because the fence gives me my outline of where my house is at, so then I can start populating what's inside it. So I'll show you, I did not, in this one, I did not do the fence first. And what happened was, the way that everything lined up, you'll see that I have a gap right there, because my section of fence that I duplicated and duplicated didn't line up perfectly. So what I have to do otherwise is start to manually go in there, and I really want to avoid having to manually do anything. We can laugh, it's good. All right, so what I'm going to do is build one of those little fence posts. So simple, there's nothing fancy here. It literally is just a cube, okay? In this instance, we're not using any bevels. We want to keep the geometry as simple as possible. The sketch and tune thing on the end, if I go to that, this one here will actually outline every single edge that we have inside of the surface. So if we had bevels, this thing would be crazy complex. We don't want that. We want to keep it as simple as possible. All right, so I'm going to make this really small. The smaller I make this, the bigger my land is going to seem, because we're kind of relating it to a certain scale. Okay, so if it's that tiny and I have 1,000,000 of these things, that my house is going to seem huge. If I make these things big and I only have 20 of them, my house is going to seem small on this little plot of land. Okay, so that's what I'm kind of in my mind thinking about. So that looks pretty good there. All right, so I'm going to take this and I'm going to drop that into a cloner. And remember, the default is to go up. I don't want it to go up. I want it to go over. So I'm going to say 0 here, and I'll just scoot this over in the Z direction like that. I think that's an appropriate amount. And I think 12 is probably a good number. So what I'm going to do here is I'm looking at the size of these. So I can see the size of 1. Now I see the size of 12. Knowing how many of these I may need for my house, you can see how this is kind of set up. So if I look at this and say, okay, this is probably 12, I'd have an opening and then another 12. That might be a good size. Or what I may want to do is go to that initial cube and maybe scale this down some more. Like that. And then go to the cloner and then bring these closer together the other way. And what that's going to do is make my house, again, seem bigger because these are smaller, okay? So there's my one section. So then what I'm going to do is I have my cloner here. I'm going to take one of these and build a little post. And the post is the same exact thing. It's a cube. So I can actually just borrow this cube. And when you start playing with other 3D programs, the fact of the way that Cinema duplicates things, where it keeps all this stuff, is like amazing. Other programs do not do that. It's one thing that I wish Maya would just do by default, but it doesn't. But then sometimes I don't want to do it by default. All right, I'm just going to type numbers in here. 2.5 by 2.5. Cool. All right, so that's that height. Okay, so this needs to be a little bit higher because it's a post. Still a little bit higher. Okay. That's good. Then I can hit C on it. Then I can go to faces, and I can just give this a little bit of detail. Again, in our drone assignment, we added a lot of detail to it. In our products, we added some detail. This one, we want to keep it as simple as possible. So I'm just going to extrude that in, extrude it up, extrude it out, and then extrude it up. That's all I did there. Maybe I'll just, for fun, I'll just extrude this and scale it in just so I have that. All right, so that's cool. Make that touch the ground. That's good. My cloner here needs to be scooted down a bit. And then I also need another board to go across these. So I'm going to duplicate this again. I'm going to rotate it. And rotate it. Oh. And move that and move this. Okay. Now the way that I'm going to be duplicating this is I don't want to have this bar on that side too, because I'm basically going to go like, here's the start of it, the end of it is going to be here, so when I stack it, I need that bar to be there duplicated also, okay? So I'm only going to put one bar in the side here, one post, but the top and bottom will be there, all these will be there. So this may take a minute to line it up, but it'll work. Just a bit more there. I'm going to make it just a tad bit thinner. And notice how I'm not trying to build it all out of one shape. Again, this is kind of the neat way that this assignment's going to work, is that we're able to just build these separate shapes, and then the end product will look really cool. That's good. Make sure it touches. Good. Okay. So that looks pretty decent right there. All right, so I'll just duplicate this to the bottom. All right, so there's our section of fence. So now what I want to do is I want to take that section of fence and be able to duplicate it over and over and over again. So if I go here, these are my fence boards. This is my fence board bottom, fence board top, fence post. Okay, so these items here are all items that I want to clone. I can drop all these into a cloner, but what the cloner is going to do is grab just the top item. So I Alt-G to group everything together. Then we go to the cloner, and then you'll see it clones everything. Okay, so as long as everything's grouped, we're cool. It clones everything. Turn that off. Take my Z up. And see how it lines up perfectly because we have that post already there. Oh, so close. 51.5. It's not touching, is it? No. That works. Sweet. Okay. So then again, I'm kind of looking at my scale of things. If I need to scale something down or up or whatever, I can go to this null and I can scale it, and you'll see how it scales up the entire group. So if I need to change the scale of my scene, I can do that just by grabbing the group and tweaking that. So what I want to do is go through here. I'm going to put this in position of where this is going to be. I'm going to have, very similar to this one, the fence is going to basically come up right to that line. So this is going to come right up to that. And you can see it's not flat. I'll have to flatten that out. Okay. So that's going to come up right to about there. I'm going to add a couple more of these. Oops. Like that. All right. So that should be good there. Then I'm going to take the cloner and duplicate it. Now, if I duplicate something inside here, you'll see how, right, it makes a second copy of it. If I change anything, though, what's going to happen is that this, I have to change it in both. So if I decide I want bigger fences or whatever, then I have to go into both of these. So what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to go to this one, and I'm going to instance. Oops. So if I drop this on an instance, what this does is it creates a copy of it, but it still keeps the other ones inside there. So I still have one that I can move around and do whatever I want with, and the other one is just the other one, okay? So I can basically make a bunch of instances that I could duplicate and move around. So I'm going to grab another instance, drop this inside here, grab this instance, and pull it back. I'll have a gate back there too, so it's easier to do. Okay. Now when I get to this side where I'm going along this edge, I do need a different cloner, so I'm just going to duplicate the cloner out of here for this. I'm going to rotate. There we go. And then it's simply a matter of just adding more to the count. Now this is where you want this to line up. You can see right here, my front needs to come forward or my back needs to go back further. So if I go to my cloner here, nope, here, and I push that back, and then I go to this one and push that back, that should work. Okay, now I'm going to take this cloner here, I'm going to do an instance of it, and drag that to the other side. Now what we're going to see when we do this, if I can spin around correctly, so on this side here, that post lines up pretty good. This other cloner needs to come back just a hair. This one had the post right here, so if I go to that, there's no post and now there's a post. This one has a post, so that's good. There's no post right here. There's two posts right there. Which side am I on? This one? Oh, this one. Okay. And then back in this corner, there's another spot where there is a post line up good. And then there's an opening here. So what I want to do is I want to rotate this one around so that it matches perfectly. So if I just rotate that and then scoot it over, oops, not that one. This one. All right. I was grabbing both of them and scooting both over. That's fine. That's going to give me, yep. I'll just flip that to the other side. So I'm going to go into this cloner here and just rotate it. There. And then scoot that over here. Now I'll do the same thing on this one. Alright, so then this one doesn't have one. That one's there, that one's there. Okay. So right now the corners do not have one. Nope, good. Okay. So none of the corners have them, just the inside pieces have them. And then I can just go into either one of these, doesn't matter which one, grab the fence post, and then I could just move it into position. So I can say this is the fence post I want, it's going to go right here. And then I just kind of manually line up that fence post. And then do the same thing on this side. And I could instance that if I needed to, but I think this is good enough. Oh, that one does have one. Okay. So then this side. So you get the idea of just lining this up. This is the hardest part of this, is just doing this fence. And the rest of it is pretty easy. So I'll spend more time lining up all these things, but that's the idea of that. Okay. So then you'll build the house. The house is going to be started off with a cube. Whoops. Shrinking this in. And again, looking at the scale of the house, of what else you want to have in your scene. In this one, I have my driveway on the opposite side. In the one I'm creating now, I'm going to put the driveway on the same side as it. No, I can't do that, can I? Nope, I can't. So this house is going to be big. I'll have a little pathway that'll go there, but no driveway. All right, so this house will be wide like that. It'll be like this. I'll have room for a pool in the backyard, room for a porch. That's good. All right, so that's good there. And then I can just either create a brand new shape and drop it on top for the roof, or I can extrude off of this one. If I create a new shape, just another cube, hit C on it, go to the points, grab this, Grab the top, scale it in. Grab the bottom. Oh, so close. There we go. Right. Simple designs, that's all we're looking for. Okay, so you can go further with the design of that. I'm going to leave it right there. For the porch area here, these posts in this setup is the exact same setup I used for the fence. So do the same thing. Figure out how far you want the thing spaced. Figure out how you want that. For the door, I did extrude. It obviously doesn't show on there. So I went to the cube. I made sure that it was editable so I can go to the edges. I imagine there's going to be a step here. Every time. Why are my tools all like set to weird stuff? Back to loop. There we go. So I imagine there's going to be a porch, so I'm going to have a step, so I think that the front door would be about there. Okay, that's the bottom of the front door. There's the top of the front door, and then this is about where the front door would be. So then I would grab that face, and then I would just extrude it in. Okay, there's my opening, and then I could actually model a door out of a cube, and then some sort of handle, and then drop that in there too. Okay, if you want to have a storm door, you can add that in there as well, whatever. Okay, for the steps, the people get thrown by how to make steps. These are probably a lot easier than you think. I start off with the plane. I start off with how many steps I want. So a 3 by 3. 1, 2, 3. Yep. I hit C. I go to faces. I delete everything that's not a step. And then we just grab everything and extrude it. Why do you hate me? There we go. There's my steps. Oops, and I forgot to put caps on. Let's go back to faces. Back to extrude. Back to pull this up. Back to create caps. Yep, good. Okay, don't try to model it off of a cube. That's literally the easiest way to do it. And then you can tweak the size. I can scale it down like this so that it fits a bit better. Huge steps going into the house. Make this even smaller. Now that I have the size of the door, I want that to be pretty much the size of the door. Maybe a little bit bigger. You could add handrails to this. It all depends on how detailed you want to get with it. This is our last major assignment, so we have some time to actually play around with these things. Oops, I don't have a porch. There we go. Now I have a porch. And again, the steps will kind of dictate where the porch end, or the porch will dictate where the steps are at. For the driveway, I simply just used a cube and just lined it up with the ground. And just had it stick basically like that on the ground. Not that much. Down a bit. That. And then like this. Okay, so now is the time you can see why we don't want this to be rounded, because I can't get this flat. I could rotate it, but it still wouldn't be flat. So I'm going to go grab my stuff. I'm going to unlock this layer. I'm going to grab my land. And in this view, I'm going to grab the points. Right here. And then just go to scale and just scale that all down. So now that parcel of land should be completely flat. I should probably go to the side view also and do that. Whoop. And then I could use the smooth if I wanted to smooth that out. There we go. So that's good there. Cool. Okay. So you'll continue the same process for any other details that you're going to add. These things here were done in a very similar fashion to everything else that I've done, just duplicating and or cloner and deleting certain things. I started off with this one with a, I think it was a 4x4. Nope. It definitely wasn't that. It's probably a 3x3. So I grabbed the face, I deleted this face, I deleted this face, and I believe those two. I believe that's how I did that. And then I rotated it, and you can't, for whatever reason, click into 45. Oops. So I actually had to go over here to rotate it 45 degrees. That's not the correct direction. There we go. And then I used a cloner on this. And same process, I went, nope, not that way. Let's say I went 100 this way and 100 that way. There we go. I deleted too much. Let me go back to that. Just this one. Okay. Try that again. So rotate at 45. Go to the cloner. Turn off that direction. I'm going to go to the transform here and rotate this 45 here. There we go. Oops. Let me undo my rotate on the original one. There we go. So I got rid of that one. I don't know why that's not working this time. It did before. Okay, I'll go to the transform, rotate it 45 here, go to my object. There it goes. Okay. So now that lines up perfectly right there. Sweet. All right. So I did delete the bottom one too. That's right. Okay. So go back to the plane, back to the faces, delete this bottom one. It's not the bottom one. Yep, there we go. Okay, so this cloner here will give me enough going this way. And then I can add another cloner to this one and have it go the other way. Right, so there's my lattice. So you can try creating it another way, but that's a pretty easy way. Just making sure that you delete the correct faces. So you have this like weird thing like that. Now I did give mine thickness, so I did grab all the faces on my original one and just extrude them a little bit, making sure that I had caps on. And then when I put these back in, now they all have thickness, so it looks extra nice. Okay, then you can grab this and rotate it and position it where you need it. Scale it. Oops, scale it down. Now obviously at the bottom here, you're not going to see, or it's not there and the side is not there. Just hide it. That's all you have to do. Just put it somewhere that you can't see it. You can't see it on mine, but it is hidden somewhere. So, all right. So that's how I did that. Everything else should be pretty straightforward as far as modeling goes. Now for the rendering portion of it, let me open up my other scene. Easier to show this. All right. Let me get out of my cameras. Let me switch this back to physical. There we go. Okay. So all of my materials on here, oh, I have to show one more thing, that tree thing. All my materials on here are flat materials. And what I mean by that is they basically just have a color assigned to them. There's no reflection. It is simply straight color. That's it. Just color on every single item. So that item, the roof, the fencing is, I used a luminance white on it. My driveway is a luminance gray because I wanted it to just look flat. The trees are green. This is brown. The concrete is gray. Okay, so solid colors. The only thing that has any shine to it is the pool back here because I wanted it to have maybe a little bit of glimmer on top of it. Now what I could have done too is added a little bump to this so that the pool would look like it's actually, you know, wavy. Scale. There we go. So that would give me, you know, a little bit of shine to it with a little bit of bump. So that would kind of look neat on there. Okay. Everything else is just flat coloring on every item. Now the way that it looks like this is the original one, is I used Ambient Occlusion to get that look. So if you remember, Ambient Occlusion is the black and white that makes things, basically wherever items are touching, it has that darkness to it. So if we look at what this looks like without Ambient Occlusion, and I lower my settings here because I have this up really high. There we go. That's what it looks like. Completely flat. There's no shading on here at all. The tree has some shading because on the tree itself there is some reflectance or specular on it. The tree bark has some too, but everything else is completely flat. Okay. I don't know why it's called roof. That's the house. Whatever. So what Ambient Occlusion will do is you go to Effect. I'm under Physical, by the way. Physical. You go to Effect and you add in Ambient Occlusion. It's not in my list because I've already added it. And then what this does is if I'll set this at 100 so we can see it, is that it finds those areas where the items are making contact with each other and it adds shading. Actually, I'll hit Shift R so we can see it. Okay, so if you look at this right here where these are at, the item is the base of the fence is here, the board is right here. Because they're this close, it adds some darkness in those values. The closer they are, the darker it is. So you get these contact shadows right here. So all of my shading is actually coming from this Ambient Occlusion. The bigger this number is here, the further out it's going to be looking for stuff to make dark. So just to show you, if I set this to 1, I probably won't get any Ambient Occlusion. Yes. Okay, it's completely solid. There it is with it, there it is without it. And then the higher up this number goes, so my number was at like 500, the more Ambient Occlusion I'm going to get. So I'll delete this one that has nothing. So there it is with 100, there it is with 500. So you want to find a good value that helps your stuff kind of pop out a little bit more, okay? So that looks pretty good at 500. You can see if you look at the fencing here, it's really washed out, you really can't see it. When I crank it up to 500, that pops out a bit more, you can see it. There's no lights in the scene. It's completely driven by just solid color and this Ambient Occlusion. Okay? So that's how I got the shading to look like the shading. Now if you look at the background, I shouldn't have closed that. Yes. If you look at the background for this, this is a blue up here and then a orangey color down here. So what I wanted to do, and if you look at this, you'll see that also. That's blue up here and then this other color. There's also a vignette on here too. To create that, I started creating a camera, just a regular camera. Then I went down here and made a new material. I don't need reflectance. I don't need color. I'm going to go to my luminance. And then on here, I'm going to drop in a color or a gradient. So this gradient is basically going to be attached to my camera. So, I'm sorry, I didn't create a camera. I didn't want a camera, I want a background. Jump steps. So go to this thing and go to background. There it is. And let me delete my background just so we don't see it. And then same thing on that luminance, you're going to create a gradient, and then this is going to be the background of that gradient. So right now, if I were to render, if I rendered right now, we wouldn't see anything because I just deleted the background. It's just a gray background. There we go. If I drop this material on the background, then what we're going to get is that gradient. So it's basically going to be like dark on one side, light on the other. So the way that looks weird. So the way that I set that up is that I switch this from a U, which is left and right, to a V, which is up and down, and I just picked two cool colors. Well, one cool color and one hot color. So I picked the blue, and then I came over here and picked this like orangier color. The trick is if you go too much, like that's way too vibrant of an orange and probably way too vibrant of a blue. There we go. You want it to be subtle. And I think I swapped them too, so orange is on top and blue is on the bottom. It should be the opposite direction. Yep. Let's go back to that. Back to that. I just drag this over here, drag this over here. There we go. You can add a little bit of turbulence too if you know you want to just kind of add some noise to it. I typed in 50. There we go. That's way too much noise. And so it'll just break up that background a bit more, and it'll actually look a little bit more like a cloudy sky versus just like nothing. All right. So that has ambient occlusion on it. So that's the new thing that we haven't really added to all of our stuff. And it has this background on it with this background gradient tied to the luminance. Okay. So those are the two things that we haven't done yet. The tree, let me show you. You can model the tree any way you want to model the tree, but I just thought it's a neat thing that you can do. So if I take this cube and I kind of duplicate it a couple times, especially if you like stay with motion graphics, you have to look for like weird, interesting shapes, and that's typically what you would be animating as weird, interesting shapes. So I'm going to take these shapes and separate them like this. And under this item, I'm going to go to Metaball. I'm going to drop all these items into Metaball. Okay, and they disappear, sort of. So what this does is it actually finds, you have so many, just like ambient occlusion, you have a distance between items. It tries to find where these items are close together, and it'll create a shape. So as I take, let's say, cube 4, and I start moving it closer to these, what you'll see is that it's actually starting to create a surface. Okay, and the same thing with 3, bringing that closer in. I should probably change my Metaball settings here. Let me turn this exponential fall off on. I'll set that down to 5. That's good. Okay, so now it's coming in and doing this. Now it's only doing the vertices inside here, but you can see that as I get closer to all the other vertices that they're actually like joining up and kind of like streaking off. That's kind of neat. If I take all of these and I do a subdivision surface on them, there we go. Okay, so now they're all subdivision surfaces. I drop that into the Metaball. What you'll see is that as I start pushing these closer to each other, you'll see how they kind of like morph from one shape to the other shapes. I'm going to go to the Metaball. This 5 centimeter, if I go to my wires, is basically how long each one of these edges is going to be. So 5 centimeters is small, so I'm going to have a lot of divisions. If I set this to like 20, I'll have less divisions, so it'll actually run a bit quicker. So that's what I'm going to do, is just kind of take these shapes and start moving them towards each other to create this like tree shape. Now you could have started off with spheres too, and that would have been also acceptable and would have worked as well. So you can see how I'm just basically just changing the sizing of these, and that's changing the direction or the shape of this kind of weird tree blob shape. There we go. And then I'll go back to the Metaball again, and I'll change both of these to maybe 35 and 35. So that looks pretty cool like that, and then I would hit C on this Metaball, and it would actually give me that shape.
It's almost like you could add in clouds.
Right, and you could add in clouds that way too, yep. Okay, cool. So with this one, we are going to have a standard render, which is this thing here. So I want to set up a camera. So ignore these cameras here. So I'm going to make a basic camera. I'm going to look through the camera, and our renderings for these are going to be square. So if you need to write it down, just type in like 1200 to start, okay? Do something low, and then when you do your final render, then you'll crank it up. So 1200 by 1200, I'm under physical, I have ambient occlusion on, and I'm looking through the camera, okay? This line right here is what's rendering out, so that's what I want to set up my rendering as. So I want to find a good angle that I can use, because this will be the similar angle for all my other shots. And it may help just to hide all these other cameras. There we go. So now I can just see this camera. So as I move this around, I'm looking at those two lines. I want to show the dirt. I want to show the ground. A little bit of the pool back there. There's my upper level. Okay, so this is going to be my standard cam. All right, I may want to play with some focal length, so maybe I'd put this at 20 if I wanted to elongate what this is going to look like. Okay, or distort some of the way it's going to look. That's probably too much though, so let's go back to, just for fun, let's say 90. Okay, ignore the choppiness of it. Okay, do a little test render. Make sure you're liking everything that's in the scene. Cool. Awesome. Okay, so this is my standard camera. That one's done. So then I'm going to duplicate the camera, look through it, and then this one will be a parallel cam. So under my camera, when I select it, there's these options here. So perspective is the default. If I change it to parallel, what you'll see is that the camera is now this like flat shape. Okay, so any perspective we had is now gone. All of our perspective lines are completely parallel, and it looks different. So I kind of back it off so that I get a similar shot. And so you can see how one image, this is standard, there's parallel. You can see how the distortion is kind of playing with that. Okay, so there's the parallel, there's the standard. It's neat. Okay, so that one is pretty much set up there. Oops. I'll duplicate the parallel camera. This one will be called fish cam. Instead of the parallel, we'll switch this to fisheye. Oops. Oops, sorry, under physical, not there. Under physical, we will set this up. So I have to go actually through my fish cam. Make sure this is set to perspective. There it is. Go to the physical, and then I would use the lens distortion set to 100. And then when I render this, what it's going to do is it's going to actually give me that fisheye view of my building. Okay? And then compared to this one and that one, it's pretty much in the same spot. So that's good. I can leave it like there. Cool. All right, fish camera's good. Let's duplicate that again. And then this one will be called depth of field. Look through depth of field camera. For this one, I need to go to my render settings, and under physical, I need to make sure the depth of field is checked. And then I need to make sure that my camera is on perspective. I need to pick an item. Okay, so focus distance, I click on that, and I say I want this to be in focus. And then under this physical f-stop, I just crank that down like crazy low. And then what we should get is this depth of field, softness, softness, and then crystal clear. Wherever I clicked that button, that mouse, it should be crystal clear, and it is. I still have fisheye on here, so I have to turn that off too. I forgot to turn that off. There we go. Yes. All right, so no more fisheye, just the depth of field on there. Very cool. And then we'll duplicate this one more time, and then we'll get sketch. Look through the camera. We'll turn depth of field off, so I'll just reset this to F8, which is where it was at. For sketch and tune to work, you have to change this to standard view. And then just like the other one, you would go down to effect and you would add sketch and tune. Because I've already added it, it's right here. Okay. And what this does is it creates this shader down here that has all of the stuff on it for controlling what the curves look like, what the fills look like. You can actually do like hashing on there too for shading instead of just like flat shading. So now when I render this, it'll look pretty much like that, where we get the line work. Okay, this is why initially you want the lines to be very minimal, because when you get to this stage, any crazy amount of lines you have are going to show up in here. So if I had 1,000,000 divisions on that driveway, I would probably see at least half of that while this is rendering, and that would look pretty disgusting. I've turned it off on the, or it's automatically turned off on the ground, which is good. The defaults for this are not these ones. I played with these so that I would get my lines in the correct spot. If I turn that off, you'll see that I don't get any lines anywhere at all, because that's telling Cinema where it should have lines. So if I go to outline and I render it, yes, you'll see that it basically just outlines each one of my objects. So that could be a cool feature depending on what you wanted to show off. If you are doing a product animation and you wanted to show off the lines of a car, you wanted to use that in animation, this is how you could do that, just by simply rendering out just the outlines. You can see that. I also may want overlaps, or I may want, I think I did combine all. I think I did folds, creases, borders, edges. I mean, realistically, you just click it on, check it out, see what it looks like. I've gone too far. Yeah, I don't think I had edges on. Oh, maybe no, I didn't. Yep. See, if I put edges on, it's every edge. That's like way too much. There we go. So I got a nice little edge right here, and then these are lined up. And what I wanted to do originally, playing with those settings, I want to make sure that my step here, and you can see it doesn't do it, my step has a line right there, because otherwise that looks weird where it intersects. So I did intersections, I don't know why I didn't see it. And then under intersections down here, I did project. And then I believe that was the one that I played with in order to get the intersections on that step. And when you're rendering anything in anything at all, in Cinema or whatever, it'll always render the thing last that you want to look at first. It's just a rule that it does. There we go. Yep. So now I have the intersection there, which is obviously what I wanted. Okay, sweet. So now that I've gone through and checked that all 5 of these things work, I may want to lighten the roof on this one. This one, it looks pretty good, but then when we get down to sketch, that roof is really dark, so I may lighten the roof a bit. Okay. Then I would go back and actually crank up my settings, make sure all my other settings are good, and then render each one out. Okay, and I'll show that in a second. When I go back to one of these other cameras, like my parallel or like my standard camera, which I like to put them all together. So there's my standard camera. It doesn't update the settings, so my settings are still set to sketch and tune. So I have to turn this off and then go back to physical and then render my stuff out. Okay. So on here, when we do our final render, each one of our images will be 3,000 pixels. So don't start off with 3,000 because every time you hit render, it's going to take a long time to render it out. Okay. So 3,000 pixels. Under my save, what I did was I directed this to my folder. So I put this in my environment renders. Sarcona environment, there we go. And I'll put an underscore, and I'm going to click the arrow and then say insert current camera, I believe is what I want to put. Yes, okay, current camera. So what this will do is that when I render this out, it'll actually render it out and save it with that name. Okay, whichever camera renders out, that's the name that's going to put inside that list. Under anti-aliasing, I want to make sure this is set to something other than cubic because that's kind of low. So I'd set this to Mitchell for the physical rendering, and then for the standard rendering, I'd make sure it's set to best. That's all you have to worry about there. Nothing here that you need to really worry about. That's all fine and dandy. Cool. I don't need depth of field on my standard camera, so I can turn that off. Ambient occlusion should still be the same. Some other settings you could play with too. Things like your vignette. So under here, under each camera, there's a vignette setting. And I have my settings cranked up ridiculously high, but it's fine. But with this, what you're able to do is create this darkening that goes around each one of your images. So if you look at these ones here, you'll see that they actually have this nice like Instagram filter that goes around the edges of it that look like it's our attention gets drawn right to the center. So it actually looks really nice how that's set up. Sketch and Tune doesn't have it because Sketch and Tune is not using this feature of that. This vignette can be added in after. Like in Photoshop, you can create a vignette and add it in after. If you've had the original Photoshop class, unless your teacher hates vignettes, they did not show. They would have shown that. Okay, so there's a vignette. This is way too dark for a vignette, but you see the idea with that. Versus this one here, completely bright all the way around, and that one which has the darkening of the edges. Okay, so it's something that you can play with inside here to get something nice I forget what my number was. If I click on this one, 60. So I think I ended up with 60 on mine. Okay. The other thing that you can play with too is chromatic aberrations. So there's this, before when we were trying to create 3D stuff, you always want to make it look like it's realistic. Obviously with this, it's not looking realistic, but we can blend the two where it's cartoony, realistic kind of thing together, okay? So if I render this out, yes, go ahead. What chromatic aberration does is if you've ever had a camera and you've taken a picture of something and you've zoomed in on the pixels, typically you'll see a shift where the red, green, and blue pixels don't all line up correctly, and you get like this, like a haloing or shadowing kind of effect. So that's what chromatic aberration does, is it kind of softens the pixels a bit. So if I go to the before and the after, I really got to crank this up so you can see it. Just put that at 200. I want it to be obvious so you can really see it. There it is. So you can see how there's like little blue and yellow pixels all over this thing. That's something that typically you would get if you had a camera and your digital camera took a picture. Sometimes if it's not a good enough quality, you would get that kind of thing. Okay? In the background it looks disgusting, but for the other stuff it actually gives it a nice, more realistic look. And again, I've gone crazy with this 200%. You probably have it at like 75% or something. There we go. So that's a nice vignette on this. And if you look at the before and after, you can see it definitely adds a nice little grain to it, where it feels a little bit, and projector is making it look a little bit more ugly, but it makes it feel a little bit more realistic. All right, so you've modeled all your stuff here, you've textured all your stuff with flat coloring, you've created your 5 cameras, so then you just simply go through, render your standard camera. Oops. And I'm just going to open up my render view so that that doesn't do that again. Render picture viewer. I wish programs were all the same. There it is. There we go. Okay. So you'd render this one out, and then, oops. Make sure you're on the correct one, and then you would just save that one out, hit OK, and then call it blah, 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 whatever you want to call it. Okay. Once you have all of them, you'll just go into Photoshop, make your document. I'll show you on this. If I go to my standard one first, standard cam, there it is. I'm going to take this one and take my canvas size and make it percentage-wise, because it's easier to do it that way, 500% wider. That way I have enough room for 5 of these things. So then I just open up each one of these images. There we go. And I copy it. So I did Control A to grab everything, Control C to copy. I go to here, I paste it, and then I just scoot it over so it lines up. There we go. And then I would go to the next one and do the same thing. Cool. If there is a little gap, I like to nudge it over just to make sure that it's lined up exactly where it should be. There we go. And if it's really still off, then I may just fudge this and just scale it just a hair. There we go. Okay, then I would go down here with my text tool and I would type in fisheye. Make sure it's on top so I can see it. Make sure it's a big enough font so I can read it.
I can read that.
Well, it's on a projector, of course you can read it. There we go. Sweet. And then I would just copy this over just like we're copying stuff in Cinema, and then I would call this one Toon Shader. And then go to the next one, standard, go to the next one, whatever. So you'd save that. So your turn-in for this is going to be one big long image with your 5 different renderings. If you want to play with some other kind of style, you can definitely play with some other kind of style. If you want to look at different settings that are in here, you can look at different settings. The other one I didn't show was this white balance. So I have it set to daylight by default, but if you set it, here's daylight. So just so you can see, there's daylight, you can see how white the fence is. If I set this to shade and I render it, it'll actually give it more of an orangey kind of glow to it. So it'll actually look like it's more of like a sun coming up kind of morning. So there's the 2 differences there. So you get this nice little change of color. Now you could also go into Photoshop and tweak the colors there too. There's nothing wrong with that. In each one of these images, I could go through and grab this one and then go to any of my adjustments, hue and saturation. I could desaturate it. Oops, I'm not selected on it, so I can't desaturate it. Deselect. There we go. So I could desaturate it some. I could hit OK. I could add a curves to this. There it is. Just to help boost the contrast a bit more. Okay, so remember, Photoshop is not just a tool you took for fun. It was actually like useful in other programs. If I want it to be crisper, I can go to my sharpen. I can do an unsharp mask on this. That's way too much. Yep, just a bit. Okay, so lots of tools that you can play with inside of here, and then obviously lots of ways you can tweak it inside there. Cool. So that should get you through that last assignment. Okay.